And welcome, Wound Care Gurus, to this week's next episode of Facebook Live with Wound Care Gurus. We're excited that you guys are all here with us tonight. We have an extra special guest we're going to be bringing on. Just a couple of really quick housekeeping tips throughout the night. Number one, obviously, there are chances for you to comment and or ask questions. So use your comments, your chat boxes, to submit your questions or comments about anything. We certainly love and appreciate your feedback. So anyways, with that, let's get started here. I want to bring and introduce to you our guest for tonight. Giselle is here with us from Apulse Medical. Welcome, Giselle. Glad you could be with us tonight.
Hi, Bill. Thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad you could take the time to be with us. I'm excited for you to be able to share with our audience some of the exciting new stuff that's happening with your company and the products that it brings to the wound care market. There's a lot of very cool and interesting things that caught my attention. And again, tonight we just want to help educate our audience as to what these can do for them when they're appropriate to be used. But before we get into all that mumbo jumbo, let's kind of start with you a little bit. I like to let our audience kind of know who they're talking with tonight. So could you give us a little bit about your background, please?
Sure. So I am a registered nurse. I've been in nursing for 30 years, and pretty much all 30 of those years has been in wound care in some aspect. I did about a little over 20 years in home care, and I've been in industry now for about 13 years or so. So, love wounds. I love, looking at clinical outcomes with and making, partnerships with customers. And so that's pretty much about it. I'm a new grandma, have a granddaughter that's 2 years old, and reside here right outside of Baltimore, Maryland.
Excellent, excellent. So how long have you been in the industry side of the business of wound care?
Yeah, so I've been in the industry side of the business for about 13 years
Okay,
now.
excellent, excellent. All right, cool. Well, terrific. What I'd like to do is ask you just how is your approach, since you're a clinician on the industry side of wound care, how do you approach your role in working as a clinician in industry?
Yeah, so for me, I'm big on partnering with our customers as an extension to our sales team. So I'm the clinical partner. I'm the resource as far as education. Education is really the key for me to really get our customers to understand how wounds heal if they're not getting the positive outcomes they should. Being that what I would call a wound detective, figuring out all the missing pieces as to why we're not getting positive clinical outcomes. So for me, being in industry, my key role is going to be that educational arm of
Sure.
the sales force.
Awesome. That is excellent, excellent. So could you tell us a little bit about Apulse Medical?
Yes. So APULSE has been together since 2018. The wound care division of Hollister decided to divest their wound care division and pretty much focus on their ostomy and continence business. So what ended up happening was when they decided to divest the wound care division, the two manufacturers of Endoform and Hydrofera decided to, come together, form a joint venture and have a joint sales team and clinical team. And the reason why they did that is because we as a sales organization and also the clinical team, we knew how and we saw in the field how these two technologies really were synergistic and partnering and working together and tackling pretty much a couple of the two major reasons why wounds don't heal. So that's how a Pulse became an organization.
Excellent, excellent. Well, great. Well, I know that we've got a couple of different products that Pulse has. So,
Yeah.
I think the first one that we wanted to touch on is Hydrofera Blue. I know there's a couple of different versions of it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, let's start with kind of what is the role of Hydrofera Blue in wound care.
Yeah. So we talked briefly, about how wounds don't heal or how wounds get stagnated in that inflammatory phase of wound healing. Our portfolio really tackles two of the main reasons. So if we take outside of eliminating the cause of the wound and also taking care of the patient-centered concerns, one of the biggest key aspects that Hydrofera Blue does is it really looks at that bioburden piece. And when we talk about the different forms, the first form is the Hydrofera Blue Classic, and it's a polyvinyl alcohol foam. Based on the pore size and what it does, it's about the closest thing that you'll be able to get to natural sea sponge. So, with that being said, you're going to get that natural negative pressure in that wound bed. What's also very unique about the Hydrofera Blue portfolio is that it is antibacterial, but what's sweet about it is that the kill of the bacteria happens in the foam itself. So
Excellent.
you have gentian violet, which is effective against gram-positive organisms and some yeast, and methylene blue, which is effective against gram-negative organisms and some yeast. And so what happens is the kill happens in the foam, which really then allows that wound bed a clean space or a cleaner space
Sure.
for the wound to heal.
Makes sense.
So yeah, so if we look at the Hydrofera Blue Classic, so I told you, Bill, I did home care for a little over 20 years. So if you put up that hand picture,
Yeah, let me click on that here. I'll bring that up real quick.
awesome.
There you go. It is up.
Yeah, so for me, it was not unusual to walk into a patient's home, and we know in home care we're on their turf, and see a wound like so with all of that devitalized tissue. And according to my Nurse Practice Act and what I could do in Maryland, I could not do any sharp debridement. So if I were to come into that patient's home, and it's not always feasible to get them into a wound center to get sharp debridement, what would I do? So in a case like this, we can see that Hydrofera Blue alone, actually within a 5-day period, really removed all that devitalized tissue within the wound bed. But then if we also look at the peri-wound area and the wound edges, we can see how the edges started to roll. And the Hydrofera Blue Classic will flatten out those rolled edges as well. So what it did was it really aided in that autolytic debridement process, which is very, very unique to the foam because, the work is done in the foam again. And so we don't worry about cytotoxicity.
Very nice.
So that's really, really key with that. And then as the wound heals, or we really maintain and take care of the moisture of the wound, we can then transition to our Hydrofera Blue Ready portfolio, which is the polyurethane family, which can stay on for up to a week's time.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
It's as we all know, it's so important to make sure that as our wounds clean up, that we need to start decreasing the frequency that we change that dressing. I wish we could get it through to everybody how important that is, but that not everybody wants to do that. I find it, maybe you've seen it, where it doesn't matter what the dressing is they order, it's always daily. Because they're just stuck in this, everything's got to be done every day for some reason.
Yes. And that's why education is so important. Another real unique characteristic of the technology of Hydrofera Blue is, we come into situations and we see patients' wounds and we don't really know what the bioburden is doing in the wound or what the bioburden count is in the wound. If you go to the next slide.
Sure. There we go. It's up and...
Yeah, so Hydrofera Blue has a bioburden indicator. So for me as a clinician, if I was taking care of a patient, let's just go back to my home care scenario again, and I would have put the Hydrofera Blue in the wound on a Monday, and I came back on a Wednesday. Now, typically Hydrofera Blue Classic is a dressing that can remain in the wound bed for up to 72 hours or 3 days. However, if the wound, when I go to change the dressing and the dressing is white, that's an indication that there's still high bioburden in the wound. So what we say is if it's white, it's lost its fight. It's time for you to put on a new piece. If it remains blue, you can change it in 72. So for me as a clinician, that's now telling me if I'm there on a Monday and I apply the Hydrofera Blue, I come back on a Wednesday and it's white, I know the bioburden count in the wound bed is still high. If I come back on Friday and it's remained blue, I know now that I've managed that bioburden in the wound bed. So it's going to give or empower that clinician to really get an understanding or an indication of what the bioburden is doing in the wound itself. So it's very, very unique. Again, we also now just launched our Hydrofera Blue Ready Border, which is a silicone bordered foam.
Okay.
That can stay on for up to 7 days. What's very different about our bordered foam is that we do not have a silicone interface with the wound bed itself. So we have the Hydrofera Blue interface. Therefore, it's going to maintain a hydrophilic wound, a moist wound healing environment, not hydrophobic with that silicone interface with the wound itself.
Awesome. Excellent. Excellent. For some reason, it's not populating the comments, but we have a ton of them on. Thank God I've got my phone open. So we have a question.
Sure.
We have a question that came in from one of our audience. It says, "Is Hydrofera Blue appropriate for burns?"
Yes, so hydrofluoric blue is indicated for first degree or second degree burns. We know currently that there are no dressings on the market that are indicated for burns, for third degree burns. So absolutely.
Okay, excellent. And another one, just maybe you can comment and offer some advice. A person commented on the daily dress, they see this ridiculous order every day, unsuccessful in getting their practitioner to change. Any tips that you've that you've used that have been successful in getting practitioners who are stuck on daily to get unstuck?
Yes. Yeah, so really what we do, again, a big key is going to be education. So a lot of what my role is to partner with customers like yourself, our sales rep, and we will do a call or even a visit to that clinician so that we can educate them on what the products do and so that they're not afraid to order less frequent dressing changes. I think one of the things is that they're afraid and they just want somebody to look at the wound on a daily basis. So absolutely, we will partner with you guys and educate that physician on the benefits of not doing daily dressing changes because we know how that alters the wound environment.
Excellent.
And can actually slow down healing.
Yeah, no doubt. You're right. And again, like I said, it's again, it was done that way for so long, and we all know the attitude in wound care amongst the, let's just say, the less knowledgeable is,
yes.
We've always done it this way. We've never heard that one before, right?
Yeah.
And just,
absolutely.
It was drilled in them, when they went to school that you got to look at it every day, but there's no science behind that. It's just
Absolutely.
a practice that has been proliferated and I like to say perpetuated on our patients in a not so positive manner. So
absolutely, I agree with you. And it is. It's just an educational process. It's just us getting out there in the trenches, and that's one of the things that we do believe in. And Pulse, big on education. We will get out there in the trenches with you all to send the message and educate as well.
Awesome. Got another question that popped up for you. What should you secure Hydrofera Blue with? I'm assuming they're not talking about the one with the silicone border, just a regular standard one.
So let me just say this. Hydrofera Blue Classic definitely does need to be covered with a secondary dressing. So we do have application guides and all kinds of educational tools that at the end, my email address will be up there and we can most definitely get whatever pieces of literature people may need. But what I always tell people is with the Classic, what is your clinical goal? What is the drainage doing as well? So if you have a moderate to heavy amount of drainage and you have a lot of devitalized tissue and you want to really aid that wound in that autolytic debridement process, then if the wound is draining a ton, you're going to use some sort of super absorbent or another foam. However, if your goal is to aid in that autolytic debridement process and the wound is not draining a ton, you can secure that with a semi-occlusive dressing. Another thing, if they're using the Ready or the Ready Transfer, those can be used under compression, ACE wraps, casting, Una boots, etc. So those would be the ones that are going to be securing the dressings in place.
All right, excellent. Appreciate it. That's good. I hope that sounds like it handles it. So let's move on because I think we got the Hydrofera Blue pretty well, and I appreciate that. How about you guys got a second product called Endoform. So what's the role of that product in wound care?
Sure, absolutely. So for me, when I think about wounds getting stalled in that inflammatory phase of wound healing, we talked about the bioburden piece. And now we're going to talk about scaffolding and proteases. So again, when you look at a wound, there are high levels of proteases in a chronic wound, especially diabetic foot ulcers and venous leg ulcers. But we know that the extracellular matrix of a wound that is not healing properly is damaged. And it could be multiple things that damage it, right? We know that we're not just treating the wound in the patient or the hole in the patient. We really have to look at the entire patient. But when we're talking about those chronic wounds, one of the things that we know that chronic wounds may be high and elevated in these proteases. So what Endoform is 100% extracellular matrix. So when we look at what an ECM does, I think of it as the conductor of a well orchestrated orchestra,
Okay,
right?
nice.
So what the ECM does is telling all of the proteins and enzymes and all of the things that are important for wounds to heal. It tells them when to come in, when you're sounding off too loud or there are too many of them that are there. And then it's also that structural support for that wound to heal. It produces that foundation for granulation tissue to build on. So when we think about what an ECM does, Endoform is 100% extracellular matrix. So when it is applied or put in the body,
Hmm.
it acts as a sacrificial substrate to allow the body to heal thyself, per se.
Okay. Would it help to
Uh,
bring up your little prop? I know you had a slide on endoform. Would you like
yes,
me to
let's
bring
hold
that one
that
up?
slide up.
All right. Okay, let's do that. All right, there you go.
Okay. So we know that it's an ECM. Now, we talked about the proteases. By just looking at a wound, we can't tell what the protease activity is. So just like with hydrophilic blue, we get a visual indicator on the bowel burden piece. Endoform is going to give us a visual indicator of the proteases that are in the wound bed itself. We know that proteases really are the reason why wounds remain chronic and also probably one of the number one reasons why grafts don't take. A lot of times, surgeons put these expensive grafts on patients, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's failed. Well, did we properly prepare the wound bed for that CTP? So with the endoform, if I'm your patient, let's go back to me being the patient, and
Hmm.
I'm being seen by home care, for instance, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If they apply endoform in my wound bed on Monday and they come back on Wednesday, and it looks like this picture to the left, there's no visual indication or of any residual endoform. In my mind, I know that wound is still in what I call phase one, is stuck in the inflammatory phase of wound healing. So our goal is to get that wound to escape that inflammatory phase as quickly as possible. So if I go here and I don't see any residual endoform, I'm still high in proteases, I put more on. Eventually you're going to see a moderate amount of endoform, so some residual endoform in the wound bed. Now, for me as a clinician, I know that that wound is beginning to escape that inflammatory phase to get into that proliferative phase
Yeah,
of wound
okay.
healing.
Makes sense?
The goal is to get to what we see here, this third slide, where there's a high amount of residual endoform. At that point in time, the endoform is now being used as that scaffold for granulation tissue to build on. So we want to get from this phase to this phase very aggressively, because one of the things we know, Bill, we know the longer the patient has a wound, the longer the patient has a wound. And the longer they have a wound, here we go with more complications. So again, we want to get endoform in that wound bed as early as possible, and it can be used on acute wounds as well. So basically with that acute wound, it can be used it's going to go straight to that scaffolding. Okay, we
Gotcha.
may not be modulating proteases because it's an acute wound,
Sure.
may not be high in protease activity, but it can now be there for that scaffold for granulation tissue to build on. So again, it's an advanced technology only in the collagen coated category for billing, but very different. So people will say, oh, it's a collagen. No, 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 no. We have collagens type 1, collagen type 3 in Endoform, but it's 100% extracellular matrix. When you hydrate other collagen dressings or dressings in that category, they gelatinize. Endoform will never lose its structure because it's an ECM.
Excellent. Interesting. Would there be what would be some reasons why or when you wouldn't use an endoform? Are there some indicators from the wound that would be a time that it's really not ready for endoform at this point?
Yeah, so with Endoform, and we also have an antimicrobial version of Endoform as well. So the thing is with Endoform, we want to prepare the wound bed. So we want to make sure that we removed a good bit of that devitalized tissue. So that's why when we talk about the two products being synergistic,
Hmm.
sometimes it may be appropriate to start off with the Hydrofair Blue Classic to prepare that wound bed for the Endoform.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so
Yeah.
basically what you're saying is that with the wound is too dirty, it's not ready for endoform yet. It's meant to be when the wound has been prepared, or as I like to say, just cleaned up, where it actually has the potential for healing. And that's kind of the time when you switch gears. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we do have an antimicrobial version of the Endoform. that really is also very unique in that, let's say if you're in a wound center and you do a really good sharp debridement on that wound, and we know that, sharp debridement is the gold standard for removal of biofilm. But if you put Endoform antimicrobial in the wound bed, it will prevent the reformation of biofilm for up to 7 days. And in addition to that, you're going to get slow, sustained release of the Endoform, of the antimicrobial agent, because it's bound to the 100% ECM.
Okay. All right. So now, just for some clarification, in that case, because I know we talked about with the Hydrophera Blue, with the
Yes.
with the GV and the MB in there, that
Yes.
it basically controls the bioburden growth within the foam itself. Is that similar to what the Endoform is? It controls the growth of the bacteria within the ECM product, or is it actually going into the wound to having effect there? I just want to clarify
Right. So
that.
you got to remember with the Endoform, it is an ECM, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as it kills the bacteria, we're going to need something to remove the trash, is what I kind of think of it as.
Okay, sure. Okay.
Yeah, and so that's why though the two brands really work well together, because the Endoform, if you're using the antimicrobial version, we can use the hydrochloric blue to take the trash out.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, since we're on the extracellular matrix, you guys have a new product.
Yeah.
That seems pretty interesting and pretty exciting. I believe it's called Myriad. How about you give us a little bit on that particular product?
Absolutely. So let's go to the next slide.
Yep, I'll bring that up here. All right, it is good to go.
Okay, so we talked about Endoform and being very unique and advanced technology that really, from a cost perspective and what you're going to be getting, it's really, something that's really that we can use earlier as we pertain to wound healing. So the Myriad is a soft tissue matrix. So when we look at the Endoform technology, it comes from the forestomach of sheep. And the forestomach of sheep is very, very vascular. So Myriad, the foundation of the Myriad is the Endoform technology. One of the things that they do with this matrix, though, is we have the vascular channels from the forestomach of the sheep that are retained.
Okay.
So when you apply or you see the Myriad being applied in the OR, you immediately start seeing vascularization in that wound bed itself. Because of the way that it's engineered, again, those vascular channels are retained, and because of how it is prepared and it's sterilized through ethylene oxide, we've been seeing tremendous results with using the Myriad. Myriad comes in either 3 layers or 5 layers, depending upon the level of the soft tissue defect.
Okay.
But one of the things that I always recommend too is if you have a podiatrist, and let's just say you guys or someone is doing a surgery, and that patient is high risk of dehiscence, or we want to do something a little bit extra to give a little bit more support to that incision line, Myriad can also be implantable.
Oh, interesting.
So they can implant it, and the thing that comes to my mind are your DFUs, right? Because when we start doing an amputation, they're at risk for more and more amputations. Adding the Myriad before they do their primary closure, will give additional support to that incisional line as well.
Interesting. Very interesting. That is unique. I have not heard of a dressing for that type of a purpose. So my understanding is that Myriad, though, is generally used in surgical wound situations predominantly, not really in the chronic wound area. Is that correct?
No, it can be used in chronic wounds as well.
Okay.
Because sometimes what doctors will do is they will, again, because let's think about it, it's still the core foundation of Myriad is that Endoform technology. So, again, we know that these chronic wounds are going to be high in the protease activity. Myriad is going to help handle that and decrease that inflammation as well. So absolutely can be used in those chronic wounds.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, if anybody has any other questions, I haven't seen any new ones pop up recently on the comments board that I've got running here on my phone. Anything new regarding any of this? Is there, as we kind of bring this to a close, is there any, some final points, tips that you would share with your years of experience, as a clinician and with your background in industry, that you can share with our audience that, little nuggets that they can take back to work tomorrow and maybe
Yeah.
even put them to use?
Yeah, so if a little nugget that I can leave is that we know all wounds heal and go through the same 4 phases of wound healing. With each phase, there should be a clinical goal that's achieved. If you're not getting that outcome, don't just look at the wound or the hole in the patient. Let's go back and start from the patient and look at how the medications are affecting the wound healing. Look at how the disease process is affecting the wound healing. A lot of things that we overlook is really looking at the patient's activities of daily living. If they have a pressure ulcer or a pressure injury and we're not offloading appropriately, it doesn't matter what we put in that wound, we're still not going to get the appropriate healing. Again, I think it's great to collaborate as well with nurses that are in industry, because sometimes when you see a wound every day, it's hard for you to pick out those subtle changes or things that may affect the wound healing. And in many cases, we love taking those cases or those calls from clinicians where we're putting on our wound detective hats and really trying to figure out why we're not getting the positive outcomes that we should.
Sure. Well, I mean, that's a great point that you made here in the last couple minutes when you were talking, is because it's one thing that I know myself, my wife, we preach it all the time when we teach, and I steal it from a colleague of mine who's a physician who has his own wound care practice, and that is diagnose, diagnose, diagnose. If you don't know what you're dealing with, you don't know what you're treating.
Absolutely.
And as I always talk about, I've made a list. I've called it for years. I've been teaching what I call the 6 basics of wound healing. And basic number 1, you got to remove the cause. Otherwise, everything else after that is just a waste of time.
Yeah.
So, and I know that it's so easy for people to fall into the trap of what product do I need to fix this wound. I see it, on the different forums that I follow. It's very common, unfortunately, that clinicians fall into that knee-jerk, well, my wound's not healing, what should I use? It's not the product that's the problem all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll say this as we wrap up. One of the main differences I will say about a pulse is that we do have a clinical advantage, that we do have a clinical team that's here to help with answering those clinical questions or think outside of the box to get people to think of how medications may really interfere, things like that. And you know what? The thing is that if our product is not the right product at the time for your wound, we're going to tell you that as well. So again, going back to what you said, it's not always about the product. Let's go back and uncover what the cause and why we're not seeing these outcomes.
Okay, excellent. Hey, a question just popped up on the stream here, so I got one for you. Going back to the Myriad product, says how much viable tissue is needed in order to apply Myriad. So I'm assuming, retrospectively, how much necrotic tissue can be in there if you use it? Should it be 100% clean? Can there be 10%, 20%? I think that's what we're getting at.
I would probably say like 30% or less.
Okay. All right. So you want it predominantly clean so that...
Yeah, because if you think about what collagen does to devitalize tissue, right? You're just feeding the devitalized tissue. So we want to make sure, again, we want to set the patient up, the clinician up, and the wound up to succeed. So we're going to make sure that it's applied at the appropriate time.
Excellent. Good question from Jerome on that one too, by the way. So, and I appreciate, it looks like I haven't seen any new questions. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to be with our audience tonight. Obviously, this will be recorded and it'll be up for viewing on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel, Wound Care Gurus. And hopefully that we will get many, many people to come back, because I think you offered some really good information, not just on wound care and how your particular products play a role, but just in wound care in general. I think that our audience can take back to their work, and they can just go to work tomorrow with something new or look at wounds in a different way. And that's, I always tell my students when I'm teaching is that you have to be a critical thinker. And that is sometimes so missing in wound care clinicians. They're just
Absolutely.
they're looking for somebody to tell them what to do. I call
Hmm.
them an order taker, and that's great. We need people that can just implement orders. But we need people that can also look at a wound and critically think about what's going on, what's not going on, and how do we
Absolutely.
fix the problem. So,
Yes, I agree.
excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, Giselle. I'm sure our audience appreciate it. We got lots of great feedback on the website. So, like I said, if you want to check out the comments yourself, you can go to the Facebook page. For whatever reason, they didn't stream up on my thing this week. One more little issue I got to figure out with the tech.
That's
Uh,
okay. Technology.
yeah, it worked every other week. This week it decided to take a snooze for whatever reason. So
So,
thanks
Bill, you
again. I
have
really appreciate it.
my contact
Yep. Oh
information,
yeah. Let's put that up. You're
email.
good. Thank you for reminding me. Let me get that up. This is Giselle's contact information. If you want to take a screenshot of it or just quick jot down, she's got her phone number and her email that you can access her. When are you available, Giselle? If somebody wants to reach out to you.
Pretty much like from 8 in the morning to like 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So they can always email me if you can't reach me by phone. I do have another clinical counterpart, my colleague. Her name is Evelyn Hicks. So we pretty much divide the country. I cover the eastern portion of North America. She does the central and the west. And so we definitely are out there working with the reps, and we travel, we teach. Our job is really to partner with our customers to make sure that you guys are getting positive clinical outcomes. So definitely reach out, email, call, and we'll make sure that you're taken care of. And I
Excellent.
appreciate this, Bill. Giving me some
Awesome. Well,
time.
thank you very much. And maybe sometime down the road, if you guys ever come up with another new, interesting, unique product or some changes to,
Absolutely.
kind of like a new twist on an old friend, which is what I kind of called tonight's
The
thing.
hyperparathyroidism. Yes,
If
yes,
they, like I said,
yes.
we're always looking for new tech or just something different that can potentially change the way we treat our wounds, and I know our audience really appreciates that. So thank you once again for your time this evening. I will let you go. Thanks again, Giselle, and we'll see you out on the wound care circuit, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening and
All right.
stay safe.
Yep. Bye bye now.
Bye.
All right, everyone. I did get one. Somebody popped up a question here quick for me. Somebody was asking about the other basics, if I remember correctly. I'm scrolling back here to find it. Yeah, I said, what are steps 2 through 6? I only mentioned one, which is remove the cause. Number 2 is moist wound therapy. Number 3 is remove the necrotic tissue and the epibole. Number 4 is manage your bioburden. Number 5 is adequate tissue perfusions. And number 6 is adequate nutrition. So again, I know I read those pretty quickly, so this will be available via recorded version. So if you didn't write them down fast enough, you can just go back and play it and write those down again. I want to thank everybody once again for spending the evening with us tonight and sharing our time with Giselle. She did a great job, and I hope you guys learned a lot. This is Bill with Wound Care Gurus. I am signing off. Good night, everybody.
Hello.